Hello, welcome to Headlines. After its funding having been frozen and dozens of employees put on leave, the US Agency for International Aid, USAID, is now facing the prospect of imminent official closure. President Trump himself and the members of his administration and the party at different points described the top aid agency as incredibly politically partisan, run by radical lunatics and promoting radically left causes throughout the world, including things that are anti-American. First created by executive order under President John Kennedy's administration in 1961 and then established as an independent agency by Congress, USAID has been quite often viewed as a key soft power tool of the United States, one of the cornerstones of its international influence and clout. Officially, the realm of international aid has been part of the 3D approach to US national security, together with defense and diplomacy led by the Defense Department and State Department respectively, forming a tripartite construct. Joining me now are Ubay Shapandar, a News Washington correspondent, who is joining from the US capital, naturally. Francisco Rocha Gonçalves, Portuguese politician, joining from Oeiras, Portugal, the city where he happens to be deputy mayor. Michael Pridgeon, former US intelligence officer, joining from Washington, D.C. Welcome to all of you.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My first question is to you, Ubay. Could we get some basic facts from you in the first place? We heard the reports about two top security officials at USAID being put on what they call administrative leave 2 days ago for refusing members of the Department of Government Efficiency, led by Elon Musk, access to systems at the agency. I imagine that administrative leave is very similar to what is referred in the UK as a garden leave, a period of paid suspension when a given official is not allowed to do anything in terms of his work and when a proper inquiry is made into his affairs.
Yeah, as of Monday morning, the doors to USAID are shut down, at least temporarily, and an email being sent out to USAID employees that unless they've been told specifically by senior officials to come in, that everyone must work from home, and dozens of USAID officials have essentially been put on administrative leave. Now, Elon Musk, the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, has been working diligently, essentially, to shut down USAID, or at least to bring the agency, which is an independent agency funded by Congress, under the control of the U.S. State Department, which would allow more executive office of oversight over the spending of USAID. Let me read to you a post on social media that Elon just posted this morning. We spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. That is the words of Elon Musk on his social media platform X. Essentially, what Elon did was bringing in officials from the Department of Government Efficiency who have been tasked by President Trump to oversee the efficiencies, government spending, profligate spending. Where can the U.S. government save money? Elon has said in an earlier social media post that he believes that that the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, can save the American taxpayers billions of dollars a day from identifying areas where there's corruption, identifying federal spending that is not needed. Now, Elon is not holding back, as you just heard. He says that his goal here is to feed USAID into the wood chipper, essentially destroying that government agency. Elon calls USAID a scam. Why? Because he believes that USAID is spending billions of dollars into non-governmental agencies, nonprofit agencies that are then providing kickbacks, political kickbacks, and then spending all this money on programs that don't essentially work or harm American national security interests or promote, for example, other political interests. And many of Elon's supporters have pointed out that USAID also spends tens of millions of dollars to the George Soros Open Society Foundation. Now, USAID stands for the United States Agency for International Development. It's involved in a number of programs, such as democracy promotion, which many here in Washington believe is, like Elon said, a scam. That democracy promotion is simply meant as a political tool to bring down governments or political groups that the backers of USAID, which was an independent agency, want to bring down. So a lot going on here in Washington, but clearly Elon is driving the charge here to bring down USAID, and Elon Musk has the full backing of President Trump, at least for now, in his ongoing effort. The Democrats are vowing to oppose this radical restructuring of the U.S. government. President Trump says that is why the American people voted for him, to radically change the way government is done. Washington, D.C., a swamp, as we heard President Trump calling it. That is why the American people brought in President Trump. And Elon Musk believes that he has a mandate by the American people to bring down USAID and to save the American taxpayer potentially billions of dollars.
Thank you, Bay. You described this agency as, not you, but you referred to it as scam on the basis of what other people said, and also it has been subjected to a huge criticism. Francisco, it has been said, and proponents of this agency, they always say that USAID has been one of the key pillars of the US policy, contingent on the idea that US has to shape the world in its own image. And under Trump's administration, US is willingly relinquishing this particular tool. Ubey has expressed arguments in favor of the dissolution. What are the arguments in favor, you think, could be, or potentially, if one looks from that particular perspective?
Well, what we are witnessing nowadays, it's a revolution in the way the Americans are making foreign policy. USAID is an instrument of foreign policy. Sometimes people tend to be shocked when I say this, but we have to differ what it is a foreign policy strategy than what it is international relations. USAID belongs to the United States as an instrument of foreign policy. Of course, that when you analyze United States foreign policy since the World War II, particularly until nowadays, until recent days, the United States has established an international system because the United States led this international system of rules and of rules and laws to its own interests. What is changing now in the American strategy, they're destroying or making a revolution in its own foreign policy, criticizing its own institutions. I'm not American, so it's not my business to tell if they're right or wrong, but they are changing their own rules, and they're making a revolution for their own. Until recent years, we were used to say that the China or Russia or South Africa or Brazil in some way were contesting the international system as we know them, as we know it. But nowadays what we have, it's a dominant power that is changing the rules of international system, the rules that they made for their domain. The United States has been dominating the international system at least since 1991 and at least since 1945 when the Second World War ended. So what they are doing is they're changing their institutions for their own public diplomacy, for their own national interest. I don't know if they're right or wrong. It's not my point to say if they're right or wrong, but they are doing it.
Michael, why is it so important for President Trump to achieve the closure of this agency? And what's your overall take on what they refer to as Trump-Musk dynamics and efficiency debate?
I think we have to look back at who was in charge of USAID under Biden, and it was Samantha Powers. Remember, even under the Obama administration, it was Samantha Powers that unmasked Trump officials and Trump cabinet members. When she was the UN, she was the ambassador to the UN in that role under Obama, she unmasked Americans. So part of it was Samantha Powers being in charge of this institution. And if you look at what she did while she was in charge of USAID, some Republican news stations and some Republican commenters that are pro-Trump are saying that USAID funded prosecutors that were going after Trump. How is that the role of a U.S. Agency to focus on the weaponization of the DOJ, the weaponization of our laws to go after a political opponent? So that's what has basically put a spotlight on this organization. The Trump administration wants to know who is sending money that's unauthorized. So what Ube said about people being sent home, or what you said earlier, those people were being sent home were still trying to send money, and their access to their computers were taken away. They were trying to send funds to these countries against an executive order that said stop. And what I mean by funds to these countries, it's not to support a humanitarian issue or to protect political prisoners. It was sending money to promote drag queens performing for children in foreign countries. It was to promote things that are nice to haves in post-conflict society. And a lot of these places, if we look at Iraq and Afghanistan, the reason we've had these forever wars in Iraq and Afghanistan is what USAID has done. They continue to fund people like me, guys that are in think tanks and people that have a vested interest in seeing this war continue because it financially benefits them. They were funding those things. If you look at Iraq, there's a good governance team there that has been paid millions of dollars since the US invasion of Iraq. And what has it given us? It's given us a pro-Iran government. It's given us militias. It's given us an Iraqi military that we cannot move to go after the militias. What has it done in Afghanistan? It's given Afghanistan back to the Taliban. And these things continue. And that's the foreign policy aspect that I look at. But what the Trump administration is looking at is how is this international agency that's supposed to look outwards, why is it funding prosecutors going after a candidate for president? So this is, I think it's personal, to be honest with you, but I think it's justifiable in this. The president is justified to go after USAID based on what it's been doing.
Ube, what's about the legal side of this story? And critics would say that these executive orders are, all of them, 65 of them, are unilateral by nature, and they are sort of pushing the legal boundaries of presidential authority. And if memory serves me correctly, as I mentioned earlier in the intro, USAID was first created by executive order in 1961, and then established by statute as its own agency via Congress in 1998. So lawyers would say that they said that an act of Congress established it, therefore there should be an act of Congress to dissolve it, and that Trump may not sort of unilaterally override a statute by executive order. What is a debate there in Washington, D.C. about the legality of this story?
Yeah, in the U.S. we have checks and balances, but at the same time, the executive office of the president has a significant amount of leeway to direct American foreign policy, and that is what's so unique about the American system when you compare it to other democracies in the West. The president is the commander-in-chief, and he has sole authority to conduct American foreign policy, and that is the ongoing debate here, the tensions where the Department of Government Efficiency came in and told USAID, hey, you have an executive order to freeze all your activities while the executive office and the president reviews for efficiencies, whether these programs are effective, whether they are counter to American national security interests. But according to reports, apparently USAID officials did not fully comply with that executive order, and up until January 31st, were continuing to spend funds. And Elon Musk posted about this development on social media when he again called USAID a quote criminal organization. That's in the words of Elon Musk. Certainly, Democrats who oppose President Trump are going to hope that the Supreme Court tries to stop the president from putting a full stop on federal spending. The American Congress has the power of the purse, but the office of the president, the executive office of the president, has full constitutional authority when it comes to structuring American foreign policy. And that is the argument of the Trump administration, saying that he is well within his rights to issue these executive orders, that USAID should actually be under the State Department, not as an independent entity. And of course, the president essentially appoints the Secretary of State, and with the checks and balances, the Senate then has to confirm the Secretary of State. But this is part of the promise of the Trump administration, saying that, hey, we've got 4 years and we have big plans. The American people sent us to Washington not to deal with these, bureaucratic issues, but to make actual change and not to be overly pedantic about it. The Democrats are already saying, in Congress, are saying that they're going to put up a fight. This issue may go to the Supreme Court. It may not, but certainly, there is going to be a big fight by the Democrats, in Congress about this. But let's remember, the Republicans are in control of both the House and the Senate.
Isn't it? Michael, what's your take on this issue involving legality of this action?
Well, what the president is doing, let's look at the FBI, for example. The president has said, listen, you can take this package, you can leave, or you can be exited and put into a role where you're not going to work on these issues. You don't have to destroy the FBI. You just have to remove those individuals that were political appointees. We call it the seventh floor at the FBI. So if you look at USAID, he's doing the same thing. He's targeting key individuals that are responsible for doing these things that Elon Musk is pointing out and saying you are now on administrative leave and you no longer have access to your government computer. You can no longer have access to your government building. So those are the things the president can do. And if Congress and the Senate are going to act, or the Supreme Court's going to look at it, it's 2.5, 3 years down the road. In the meantime, these individuals are home on administrative leave or even without pay. So that's what the president can do.
Thank you. And also, Francisco, as an outsider, as a European, USAID as a principal agency for international aid, do you think that, as an external observer, how does it look like to you? Has it augmented American prestige and clout around the world, or do you think it has done more damage than anything that could be classified as positive?
Well, if you look at the history of American foreign aid, you can imagine that there has been some issues always with foreign aid for the United States. For instance, for the World Food Program, more than 50% of the World Food Program comes from American donations that goes to American farmers. They produce in the United States, and then the United States finance their exports to the World Food Program. So sometimes we have a linkage theory connected to cooperation of the United States, but what comes to an end is that the United States, either if one likes it or not, is the biggest donor in the whole world. More than 50%, as I told you, of the World Food Program, more than 30 or 40% of most of international organizations for humanitarian services comes from United States money. So the United States has made a lot of donations for a long time. But I was listening to Michael, and I have to agree. You have to pick up the public servants that were not really acting in a good way or in a legal way and take them out of their jobs, because it is not their jobs to go after anyone. But this goes for Biden administration and for the Trump administration too. The USAID, as the FBI or other instruments for public policy, is supposed to serve national interest and national good. When they start serving political issues or political leaderships, they're not serving national interest. And that's the problem with these agencies. But we have to be very careful, because in the long term, USAID, as I was saying in my first intervention, is an instrument for foreign policy. It's an instrument for public diplomacy for the United States. When you go to a remote place in Africa, or when you go to a remote place in Southeast Asia, when there are problems, what appears is USAID. You do not feel it in the United States, because in the United States there's no USAID real presence. But in the ground, in remote places, that counts a lot for the American national interest. But as you said, I'm a foreign observer. If I was an American, if I was interested in American interest, I would be preoccupied. I would be very worried that the institution was being destroyed because of malbehavior or wrong behavior from foreign officials. You have to take the foreign officials, do as Michael was saying. Come on, man, you have done things that were not in the public interest. You have to go to administrative leave, and we have to save our institutions, because in the long term, it's the institution that save us.
Ubay, President Trump described USAID as promoting anti-American things worldwide, but USAID was designed to be the key proponent of US interests around the world. So, but what I want to ask you, cutting foreign aid has quite often been perceived as a sign of retrenchment and a premonition of global decline for a country like United States, for any other, for the post-imperial, let's say, European country, which used to be very, very influential in the past. Would you say that many people across the world would say that US is now sort of retrenching?
The US, as the world's largest economy, is by far the largest contributor to foreign aid. The US is the largest contributor to the United Nations and to many other foreign aid to countries across the world, and with USAID being one of the principal instruments in which that aid is distributed. Now, what President Trump, his administration are saying is that they don't want to stop all foreign aid completely. They're putting a freeze so they can review just what is this money being spent on. In some instances, as we're seeing with on these posts of social media by the DOGE team, the Department of Government Efficiency, some of these funds are going essentially to non-governmental organizations, supposedly nonprofits that are paying their executives very high salaries. And there are real questions on whether or not the funds that then go to subcontractors and more subcontractors are actually having an impact on the ground. So that's one of the main arguments being brought in here by Elon Musk, who's really honed in on USAID, given just the massive budget of this group. What Elon has said is that essentially he wants to take the same approach or a similar approach to what he did when he took over Twitter, now known as X. He came in and reviewed all the code, reviewed everybody that was working there, who was actually doing a real job, who can be made redundant, and then they were given a severance package. And so a similar playbook seems to be taking place here. And now President Trump has also said, we've heard him saying, along with Elon Musk, that that the George Soros Open Society Foundation is, in their view, an anti-American one. That George Soros and his Open Society Foundation have personally, politically targeted President Trump and funded prosecutors that tried to use, in President Trump's view, lawfare to try to stop President Trump from running from the presidency and winning the election. So, and given the fact that USAID gives so much money to George Soros supported or backed NGOs, that has also really put them in the crosshairs here. Now, will this completely stop all American foreign aid? I don't think that it will, but at least the argument being made that USAID should be brought under State Department will at least provide greater oversight. And that's sort of the argument that Elon Musk is making here, that there needs to be more oversight and accountability. But given that the budget is just so massive, that there's so many different programs, that it requires what is essentially an unprecedented approach. Some may call it a radical approach of at least freezing all these funds for a period of time. Again, going back to the promises made by President Trump, a radical restructuring of the federal government is viewed as a promise that he made to the American people, and was one of the reasons that he won the election so decisively, and he's in Washington. And look, it's week 2, we're seeing major moves here being made with Elon Musk very close to the president. So he believes that he has the mandate, both because of the election and because of President Trump's desire to save the American taxpayers billions of dollars. And so there is the belief here that there is a mandate, a full political mandate, to do what they're attempting to do here with USAID, which is essentially bring that organization back under the control of the executive office of the president.
Michael, what I understood from Ube and also from Francisco, that it's a question about efficiency. It's about the proper use of financial resources in line with national interests. It's about using this money not for partisan purposes, but for national interests. And ultimately, when we go to that point, reflect on what Trump said during his inauguration speech about the American golden age, about that the best days of the United States are ahead of this country, not behind it. So what will be the main instruments employed by the Trump administration to advance those national interests?
Well, if you're looking at the United States from abroad, you have to understand what the Trump foreign policy is going to be. And it's going to be this. It's as simple as this. Does this benefit the United States? And Washington, D.C. is going to be the least listened to city for the next 4 years. Trump has the pulse of the American people. The election was a big deal. It gave him a mandate. And if you ask Americans what they're worried about immigration. What did USAID do? They funded the NGOs that brought all these people in. That's going to stop. If you are a foreign country and you're worried about a good relationship with the United States, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, what can we do for the United States? Can we bring in U.S. investment that's going to help Americans back home? Can we handle our own security problems so American troops don't have to go there? Now, I'm called a hawk in foreign policy circles, as somebody who wants to intervene and go after things. But I'm a smart power guy, and Trump's doing that. Smart power means sanctions, designations, tariffs, right? The art of the deal. Put pressure on a country, make it painful for them to continue their course of action, and have them change that. We are not in the world of deploying U.S. troops anywhere, maybe special forces, maybe intelligence assets, but we are not going to be worried about a kinetic strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Why am I bringing all of this up? Is that people should not confuse an isolationist tone from this U.S. president and the inability to do something kinetic in a foreign country, or use smart power. Smart power is economic punishment, and it's also strategic surgical strikes against designated individuals. And if you're looking at the U.S., you have to understand the American people. What do they care about right now? The price of eggs, the price of gas, a safe community, a good economy. So if you fall out of those four primary pillars, you're going to be out of luck for a while. So I've advised some of my Middle Eastern friends, listen, if you want the United States to care about Iraq, Syria, Jordan, these other countries, you need to help the U.S. deal with its number one problem. What is that? All of the people that are inside the United States that may be tied to some hostile countries in the Middle East, offer your intelligence services to the Department of Homeland Security to go after these individuals and help gringos like me understand who they're looking at. That's important. And that's the prism. Marco Rubio said it best. It's going to be an America first foreign policy. Does this help the U.S.? Then yes. And when it comes to the Middle East, right now we're seeing, does this hurt Iran? Do it. Does this help Israel? Do it. Does this help Saudi Arabia? Do it. And when you look at the Middle East, if you're a big country, you may be very, very small when it comes to this administration in importance based on what their goals are. And we're seeing a lot of that. The first guy that President Trump's going to meet with is going to be Prime Minister Netanyahu. That sends a loud message to a lot of our allies in the Middle East. Now, that doesn't mean that the U.S. is going to go in line. I know I'm taking this into a foreign policy thing, but you need to understand all this is related. The State Department is going to be more powerful than the Pentagon, but the State Department is going to have deterrence on the table. It's going to have the stick on the table. Unlike the Biden administration, their first sentence is always, we are not seeking conflict. We don't want a war with anyone. We just want you guys to stop. And when you tell an enemy to stop without the stick on the table, the enemy doesn't stop. It continues. So that's the prism that foreign countries have to look at. When you look at the Trump administration, it's this simple. Does it help the U.S.? Then go for it. If it doesn't, you're probably going to be not last in line, but way down the line.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to leave here. And thank you very much for your time. Most grateful to all of you. This was Ubay Shaphandar, A-News Washington correspondent, Michael Pridgen, former U.S. intelligence officer, they both joined from Washington, D.C., and Francisco Rocha Gonçalves, Portuguese politician, who joined us from Oeiras, Portugal. See you very soon indeed.